Over the last 10 years, I've read and taken detailed notes on more than 1,200 books. And earlier today, I taught a live masterclass on my personal note taking system that I use to do that. And we cover like a multitude of different topics about learning, memory, how exactly to take excellent notes, what to look for, what does not belong in your notes, which tools to use, different personal like tips and tricks, and just weird things that I've picked up over the last 10 years of taking notes on these, 12, 1,300 books. There's a lot to get to, so I won't spend any more time in this intro. I will say, though, that for several of the books that I recommend, I do have full, complete breakdowns of all the key ideas, action steps, takeaways. That's down in the video description. It's totally free. You don't have to, you don't even have to enter your email if you don't want to. You can just have them. And everyone who was on the live call today, they were members of my private community on School called The Competitive Advantage. And so they were there live. You can ask questions for me personally. And it's basically my private business mastermind for creators, entrepreneurs who want to add at least, like, bare minimum, $1,000 a month extra to their online business. And now we'll get into my personal note-taking system that will help you outlearn everybody. It all started with one book. The whole reason I started taking notes in the first place. And that was a very specific book, and it's at a time in my life. I've spoken about it to you guys before, but this was, it was 2014, right? And I was working this, minimum wage security job overnight. A lot of my shifts were 12 hours long, and, there's not a whole lot to do, right? And, I had other people that I worked with, or saw that did the same job, and like, nothing against them, it's their own choices, but they'd spend like 12 hours just playing games on their phone. I didn't want to, like, if I was gonna be there, I had to make it work for me, other than just the money that was barely being paid to me, right? Like, there had to be something else that I got from that job. And so I found reading, that's one of the jobs that really kind of really got me back, back into reading, made me fall back in love with reading. And I'd sort of neglected it ever since, finishing high school, right? And so it really started with one book in particular, and it was this one. It was The 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene. And I still remember where exactly I was when I started reading this book. And I was working overnight still, like, this time it was in my car outside of some exhibition center. It was, wintertime, it was cold, and I was reading The 48 Laws of Power on my phone. And I was reading this book, and it was incredible. Just, page after page, things I never wanted to forget ever. And, I had to sort of, I was thinking to myself at the time, like, I have to find some way of, capturing that. I can't just read this and let it, rely on my memory to help me remember. I need to externalize this, because there's so much fantastic stuff in there. And so I started taking notes on the 48 Laws of Power, and, I have pages and pages and pages of notes. And my system has become more sophisticated over time, and your note-taking system is going to evolve on its own as well. And you sort of have to do, like, figure out your own way. I mean, you can take ideas from this, and best practices, things I've figured out along the way that have really helped me tremendously. But it has to sort of be your own, right? And, like, your own system will expand over time. You can see kind of what I was reading back at that time. Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl, absolute classic, right? And then there's my notes from Moonwalking with Einstein by Joshua Foer, which is a fantastic book on memory. But you can see that, I've got maybe a page or two, like 2 pages of notes, a little short little summary, compared to my later notes that got, more sophisticated, and, I have, like, much more in depth. I know, what exactly to take notes on. We're going to cover that later on. So it definitely evolves over time. But one of the, the things to remember is that, like, the slightly imperfect system that you actually use is going to be better than, like, the absolutely perfect system, that you don't, right? And that idea came from Tim Ferriss, somebody who's and I've read every single book that he's written except The 4-Hour Chef, and I've pages and pages of notes, and just from him, like, there are authors that I've
like that I've read like a dozen books by then that have, a whole like notebook full of notes, or whole files full of notes. And I would never ever be able to remember that all on my own. I had to sort of find a way to externalize it, right? So I do all of this using basically just three tools, and you don't need a whole lot. We'll talk about this later on, but I keep things as simple as possible, and like as you kind of increase the complexity, like the odds that you actually use it go down, I think, which is why I'm not like a huge fan of things like Notion, which can be extraordinarily helpful. People swear by it. Maybe I just don't know how to use it as effectively as possible. But there's Notion and Obsidian and like all of these sort of complex things, and I keep it very very simple. So I got my book. Here I've got Psycho Cybernetics and Maxwell Maltz, another absolute classic, and actually I reference him later on as well. Google Docs, which is where I take all of my notes, or where I move all of my notes after I'm finished, and iNotes, the note taking app from Apple. That's really all I use, and I don't tend to take physical notes. Like there are plenty of people who actually they have like a physical like handwritten notebook of all of the books that they've read, the notes that they've taken. They have it stored in their house, and like that's fine. Ryan Holiday, the author, he has like this massive like note taking system, and he's used it for every single one of his books, and they're bestsellers. I mean, his system works. Like that's totally fine for him. I would be like, I would be absolutely not terrified, but you know what I mean, of like fire, like what happens if what if there's a fire? What if there's a fire? Like your notes just go up in flames, right? And, if you move, or, especially, if you take notes like inside the books themselves, and you give the book away, or you lose it, like you have to basically keep every single book you've ever read or taken notes on, whereas you could just have this Google Doc and these file folders with everything that you need, like every single thing that you've taken notes on. And there are a whole bunch of like advantages to that we'll talk about. We'll talk about too. So, nothing against physical notes, and actually, like there's a real connection, like a kinetic, connection between your body and your mind, right? And it actually does help in learning to write out physical notes. So there definitely are advantages, and it's kind of well documented that reading ebooks and listening to audiobooks, like you're not going to get the same impact, same like educational value from reading like a digitized version of an actual real book. Like real books remain undefeated, but at the same time, you've got this sort of robust note taking system that kind of can survive fires and floods and all of these things. So moving on. So a few advantages that I feel like are worth mentioning here. So like I said, I take so we'll move into like how I move my notes from iNotes to Google Docs. But basically that's where all my notes end up. And I've got, file folders, full of, basically my notes are separated by book and by year. And I keep track of things like finished book by genre. So I'll have a list of all of the psychology books that I've read and all of the philosophy books that I've read, things like that. I find that extraordinarily helpful. And that's another one of those things that's kind of, it's like nobody told me to do that. I just realized that, hey, if I'm referencing the best psychology books, or like if I'm creating a video around the best philosophy books, I'd want to have all of the ones that I've read in one place that I can sort of go back and remember some of them, because like 1,000 1,200 13 books, I don't remember every single book that I've read, and you shouldn't sort of place those expectations on yourself either. But Google Docs definitely help. So everything's searchable. I can just like type in like the book that I'm looking for, a specific passage or what have you. That's the keywords. but like a name or a date that I want to look up, like it's all there. I can just search it. And with a physical book, I mean, you can't, like, you literally can't do that. So like if I want, like, what page, if I don't know if it's on page, somewhere between page 50 and page 75, you have to flip through a physical book for like 25 pages. And like, that's if you know even like the range of where it is. But with Google Docs, you just don't have to do any of that. You just go straight to where it is. So search anything. One thing you can do is kind of tag different books with keywords if you want. So like if you're researching a particular topic, you can sort of like, maybe like, I don't do this necessarily on my own, but you definitely could. I put it, or I would put it at the bottom. Say you're researching 20th century philosophy, so you write at the bottom of each individual Google Doc for the book that deals with that subject, right? 20th century philosophy. So then you can search later, and when you have all of the books pertaining to 20th century philosophy underneath that tag. So when you search it, they all come up. And again, like, that's a massive advantage of my system, if I may say so myself. And then, as can't be stressed enough, fireproof, floodproof, disaster proof, biological, everything proof. So that's pretty good. So what do I actually look for when I'm taking notes, and what do I not look for? So one thing that I don't include in my notes is anything that I can look up later. Or look up on the internet. Like if it's a Googleable, I just made up that word, I think, fact, then it doesn't necessarily have to make it into your notes. Like the dates of something, if it's like a fact that you can look up, just like, you don't really have to. I'm thinking more of things like incredible quotes that you do not want to forget ever. And so as an example, I'll just exit full screen here. One of my favorite books of all time, it's The Greatest Salesman in the World by Og Mandino. It's one of my favorite names as well of any author. I love Og. Imagine being named Og. But anyway, so you got my notes here, and this is a few years later, so my summary is a little bit more advanced, sort of in depth, and got more more notes. And what does he say here? He says, "Forgetting yesterday, neither will I think of tomorrow. Why should I throw now after maybe? Can tomorrow's sand flow through the glass before today's? Will the sun rise twice this morning? Can I perform tomorrow's deeds while standing in today's path? Can I place tomorrow's gold in today's purse? Can tomorrow's child be born today? Can tomorrow's death cast its shadow backward and darken today's joy? Should I concern myself over events which I may never witness? Should I torment myself with problems that may never come to pass? No, tomorrow lies buried with yesterday, and I will think of it no more." And like, I never ever want to forget that. I think that's amazing, And I read that, like, the whole book is like that, by the way. Like, it's a sales book. I mean, it'll help you like sell more stuff, but it's so much more than that. Like, it's like absolutely one of my favorite books of all time, and my notes are just studded with fantastic passages like that, that I never want to forget. And so those are the kind of things that you're looking for. And like any time that you come across something like that, you cannot trust your memory. Like, I'm never going to be able to just recall that passage from memory. And I mean, yeah. So like, you're looking for that. Obviously, key ideas and themes, like what you're actually reading the book for, as well. Like this much is obvious, right? But like you want to, depending on the project, but what I feel is that you should, like, your notes should more or less substitute for having the book there with you. Like, everything that you might want to know or remember should be like in your notes. Like, the Google Docs are free, right? Like, you're not gonna like take up more space by taking up more notes. So I always err on the side of adding it to my notes, instead of not adding them, right? You can always delete it later, but if you sort of pass by something else or something that you might want to take notes on, I just view that as an automatic yes, and I just put it in there. And you can always take it out later, like I said. So interesting passages, and then actionable ideas as well. So this is interesting. So a bunch of the things I learn from books don't make it into my notes, or at least not in full form, but I will immediately apply it or implement it to what I'm doing. So like a sales book, or like any sort of business development book. I read a book on customer retention and getting referrals. I don't have like pages and pages of notes from that book, but I immediately changed the way I do things in my business, right? And I took those ideas and actually used them like immediately right away. So they may not have made it into my notes per se, but I absolutely use them. And one thing that some people do with this, and I don't, but I definitely see the value when it comes to actionable ideas. They will basically take every single actionable idea that they come across, and they will put it at the bottom of their summary of their notes. So you see in my notes, I've got summary and all the notes. So what they would do, and this seems like a fine idea. So they'd have like summary, notes, anything else. Sometimes they separate the quotes. I don't see the need for that unless maybe you want to separate it by theme. Again, these are all personal choices. And then at the bottom, they've got actionable steps. So basically everything that the book like tells you to do or suggests that you do, and all in one place. So you don't have to like go around searching for it. One of the most important things about the whole note taking thing, it should ease your mind. It should take your mind off of having to remember everything. And what's like, instead of like, you'll notice that I don't stop my entire reading to copy out the whole passage all at once. And I've got examples of each format of book that I'll read or listen to, and what I do in each case. But I don't spend a whole lot of time, unless it's a very short sentence or something like that. Then I'll immediately add it to my notes, my iNotes on my phone. But like most of the time, what you want to do is just keep on reading, get back to your book as much as possible. Don't interrupt the flow. So I'll show you a little bit about how I do that. And so these are 3 books that I'm reading right now, or I've almost finished. So on the far left here, we've got The Possibility of Life by Jamie Green. It's a fantastic science book about the possibility of alien life and what that might look like, and a whole bunch of like questions kind of coming forth from that. It's a really fantastic book. I love it like so much so far. But it's I'm reading it on my phone. It's one of the reading apps that I use. It's iBooks, just on my iPhone. And so you'll see here that so this short passage here, we fear that as we learn more about what's beyond our solar system, silence and loneliness await us. So that's short enough that I can just kind of type that on my phone and get back to my reading as fast as possible. But then these other notes here, what I would do, and like this again, super simple, is one of the advantages of ebooks. So that's the ebook page that it's on. And so on page 28, I know that there's something that I have to come back to, and the passage that I want to make it into my notes starts with, but the question most often, blank. So I know that when I'm finished reading that book, I'll just I will upload those notes to Google Drive, and I will basically just write my summary, and then I'll go down the entire thing and copy them out. So find where all of those passages start and end, and just type them out in their full length. And again, just move like straight back to my reading. And it's another sort of advantage of ebooks, right? So you don't have to like search throughout the whole book like physically. There's a search function like in ebooks, right? Like iBooks, if you're using Everend or Kindle, like you can just search for the passage you want. So I can look up, to consider the earth, and like that's page 36, to consider the earth, and it'll come up just on my search thing that's exactly where it is. You can bookmark things in your ebooks, and it's just super simple, right? And then a little bit more complicated, but not really, like nothing too bad, is physical books here in the middle. And this one is Don Quixote, and I've been reading it for the last like 6 months. And so here, what I do is a little bit different again. So if it's a short passage, I just write it out. So like in the bottom, I am a young man, let life only last, and with that all will come right. And that's short enough that, I thought that was kind of like, not mind-blowing quote, but I wanted to remember that. I wanted to sort of immortalize that in my notes, as if Don Quixote wasn't immortalized already. And so I typed that out, immediately, and then I put my phone down. I got back to my physical book, right? And then, so the other notes here, so I'll do the same thing as I do with the ebooks, but since it's a physical book and I can't like search exactly where everything is, what I'll do is I will make a note in my iNotes app that like where it is in the page. So fairly simple. Like you get this immediately, obviously. So on page 19 at the very bottom, there's a quote from Pallida, that starts with "Pale Death." And then on page 26, in the middle of the book or thereabout, it starts, "In short, he became so absorbed." So I'll go to that page. I'll look around the middle of the page. So I'm not like, if it's like the very last sentence at the bottom of the page, I don't have to go through the entire page to look for it. I know it's, somewhere near the top, middle, or bottom. So again, super simple. And then I don't interrupt the flow of my reading as much as possible. And I just kind of get back to it. And then with audiobooks, so this one is, it's called Zero Resistance Selling. Again, it's by Maxwell Maltz, same guy who wrote Psycho-Cybernetics, one of my favorite psychology books, personal development books of all time. It's fantastic. Basically about like how your self-image governs your behavior, how you feel about yourself, like what you do, what kind of results, and like the success that you experience. And interesting story about that. If you haven't read Psycho-Cybernetics, he was a plastic surgeon, and people would come to him, and he would perform all these operations. Like he'd fix ugly people, make them beautiful, which is public service. But no, he would notice that like fixing these outside sort of like blemishes or like these things that people wanted fixed did not change how they felt about themselves. Like they were hanging on to that previous self-image, and what they looked like on the outside had no effect on that. And it's a really fantastic book, and I highly recommend it. But anyway, so I'm listening to one of his sort of follow-up books, and it's sort of co-written by Dan Kennedy, a whole bunch of great marketers, and it's called Zero Resistance Selling, and it's an audiobook, right? So what I'll do is and I hate, like, this is one of the reasons I don't listen to a whole lot of audiobooks, because I know that I'm going to take notes on them, and it's such a pain. So basically what I do though is I note the chapter and the minute. So same as like a physical book where you're sort of getting a rough approximation of where it is and where you have to pick up, but then you're just putting it in there. And what I kind of find annoying is you have to go back and like rewind it and listen to the whole thing and sort of pause and then restart, and then pause when you sort of get enough of what they're saying to sort of type it out. And I can never. It's like that's actually kind of how I choose whether to read the physical book or like listen to the audio version. Like if it's more narrative driven, or if it's more like a memoir or something that I'm not expecting to take a whole lot of notes, then I'll listen to the audiobook, especially if the author themselves read it. But like if I do expect to take a whole lot of notes, I'm just not gonna I'm not gonna subject myself to that. So that's how I deal with those three separate formats, and it works tremendously well for me. And one other thing that you should probably do is put everything in your own words as much as possible. It will definitely help you remember more. And with the exception of passages like the one that I just read from The Greatest Salesman in the World, where like it's like that, like the value is in the passage itself. But if you really want to understand something, you'll put it in your own words and kind of explain it to yourself. And so like that's kind of what you're going for. And like if you sort of barely understand what you've read at first, which happens to me all the time, like I have to reread passages if I don't understand it. There's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. And even like going back in my notes, like there's definitely a value in rereading books, like anything that you don't understand that you want to. Like there's no shame at all in not getting it the first time. But what helps is kind of like the Feynman technique basically is kind of explaining it like you would to someone very, very young. And basically as simple as possible, but not like oversimplified, just in your own words that you will understand and that you'll immediately get, like in terms that you'll understand. So I feel like that is fairly important. And let's see here. Winding up a little bit, so I've got like two tactics for remembering more and using your notes to remember more. Um, uh, a few excellent books about learning to kind of discuss. So one is Make It Stick by these three authors, and they like this book represents like the gold standard in books about learning, and it's just spectacular book, right? And they're basically covers a lot of techniques. One is spaced repetition, which we've talked about before, but it's basically like returning to your notes again and again, and like it's on like the day that you read the book, like doing like this is something I'm bad at, but like updating your notes and kind of completing your notes the very same day. I'm terrible at this. Like I still have to update some of my notes, but as much as possible, like the very same day or the next day, kind of solidify your learning and kind of come back to it. And then the day after that, and maybe 3 days after that, and a week after, and spaced repetition. And so that's definitely something that helps tremendously. It's so much better than some of the other like study techniques that people use that don't really work all that well, and that they cover in that book, like cramming and like rereading. So you think that you can reread something again and you just read it over and over and it'll stick in your memory more. Like that's not how it works. And yet like that's most people do that and think it's like working when it's not as well as some of these other techniques like spaced repetition and forced recall, which is again something we've talked about before. But you're using your notes, but you're putting them aside for now and basically testing yourself and seeing what you remember, and without looking at your notes, kind of forcing yourself to recall what's on your notes, and you'll you'll surprise yourself by how little you actually remember, and that's fine. Like learning should be like successful learning is effortful. So like if you're not feeling challenged while you're learning, then you're not actually learning. And like that same idea shows up like all across, like in so many domains in life. I mean, like I use a lot of gym examples, of course, right? Like if you don't feel challenged in your workout, your body's not going to change. Like there's no reason. Like muscle growth is an adaptation to stress. Like you stress your muscles out, and they realize that I can't handle this right now. I have to grow bigger and stronger to take this on next time, and then they grow bigger and stronger, right? Whereas if you do the same exercises and the same weight, the same reps as you've always done, like you're not giving your body a chance or a reason to adapt. And it's kind of the same thing with learning, right? If you're not stretching a little bit past where you are now, then like there's no real incentive for your brain to even remember it. And so a whole bunch of learning things that not really dealing with the subject of note taking. Things like high emotional states definitely let you remember more, which I think is super fascinating. Obviously, you've got like salience, like relevancy, like if things are actually important to you, and like if they're high stakes, if you really have to remember this stuff, you will, right? And like if you depend on learning something for your job, your livelihood, you're probably going to remember it, and because it's relevant to you. And anyway, there's a whole bunch of learning things that kind of outside the scope of this note taking thing. But there's another excellent book, Learn, Improve, Master, and I've got complete breakdowns of both this book and Learn, Improve, Master. My friend Nick Velasquez wrote this, and it's just a fantastic book about learning, and super accessible. And it's not just about like academic learning; it's basically skill acquisition in general. So Make It Stick is more academic stuff. Learn, Improve, Master if you want like build a new skill, and I highly recommend reading both. And I've got breakdowns of both, so you don't have to buy and read the whole book if you don't want to. And again, like this is another use of my notes. Like I never experience like writer's block or anything like that, because I'm never working from a blank page. And like I and of like the breakdown of Learn, Improve, Master, like all of these books, I take my notes that I have, and I take them and I build this whole book breakdown out of my notes, right? That I would have anyway. So like there's a whole other use to having it. And yeah, so And then there's the art of focus. You're not going to achieve anything without focus. Like almost universally, there's like this whole. I mean, I'm only on page maybe four. Sorry, chapter 4 or 5 of the art of focus. But basically, like anyone who has achieved anything, like any measure of success in any like realm of endeavor, has had just like incredible, like sickening levels of focus, and like the whole modern world is basically conspiring to steal your focus away from you. There's another book called Stolen Focus, incidentally, by Johann Hari. I've got a breakdown of that one as well. It's a fantastic book, but the 12 causes of what he calls the attention crisis. And yeah, it's just wonderful book. So, and then The Art of Impossible as well. The reason I include this, and very briefly, is he's got a wonderful chapter on the ROI of reading, and basically how, like what I said earlier, like books will never be, like they remain undefeated. And he goes through like he writes blog posts and articles for like magazine, like full length articles and books, right? So there's 3 levels of writing, but you get like the ROI is different for each one. So like for a blog post, he might spend like a few hours writing it, researching it, and you'll spend maybe 3 to 5 minutes reading it, and like you'll get something out of it, like a few hours of his time and experience for like 3 minutes of your time. That's a pretty good deal. But it's not like nothing spectacular. And then you get into like magazines, like he'll spend maybe a couple of months writing, researching, talking to people, interviewing, and kind of collecting everything, working on the article itself, and sort of making it like pretty like as perfect as possible. And you can read it in maybe like 20 minutes, 25 minutes. Like that's still like a really good like return on your time. But then there's books, which is like, they represent like decades, like literally decades of his experience and research and like deep thinking and like the hours and hours and hours of like putting this all together and in like a digestible form that like you can just have like almost like for free, basically, or close to free. Like they're like books are either free completely or they just cost like a few dollars, and you can just have like decades of his experience. You can download decades in days, as the saying goes. So those books, highly recommend all of them. Make It Stick, Learn, Improve, Master, Art of Focus, The Art of Impossible. All fantastic. And which brings me to the very last thing that I have to say here, which is basically one of the best ways to learn anything is to teach it to someone else. And I found like taking notes on these 1,300 books that I've read has allowed me to teach others what I know, and rather effectively, right? Because I'm never starting from the blank page. I can take what I'm learning, and it's exactly the Feynman technique. Basically, you're taking what you're reading, and you're making sure that you understand it, and you're able to put it in a way that other people can understand it as well. And it's very true that when you teach something, you get to learn it twice. And I think it's just so incredibly true. And like one thing I speak about a lot is how I always try to set myself up with 2 ways to win at least, and no way to lose. Like with my with my old job, like working overnights, I had several ways to win. Like I was obviously getting paid for it. But then I was reading all these fantastic books, right? So it was two things that I was getting out of it, and yeah. So like you're always kind of looking for like multiple ways to win, no way to lose, and reading books, taking notes, sharing what you learn, and like yeah, there's just you win so many times just by like the ROI on reading is insane, and it's something that I've come to appreciate over the last 12 years, I guess, or I don't know, decade or more, where I've taken thousands and thousands of pages of notes on these 1,300 books. My life is completely different. Like it changed everything for me, and yeah. So thank you very much, and that is everything. Make mine while you sitting there complaining. I'll be training while you sitting there just waiting. I'm creating. Yeah. Sometimes I think that I'm unstoppable.